Hello again, this is Dave with OC Astronomy. I recently sent my CGX mount in for servicing, and as I was ordering it back or getting it back, waiting on it, I thought, hey, this would be a perfect time to get the CGX Polar Finder scope. That's the finder scope that helps you do a quick polar alignment. It's not completely necessary because with the hand controller you do have the all-star polar alignment, but I thought, hey, why not give it everything that I've got, make sure I've got my alignment correct, and so I bought this little guy. Let's see if I can show it down here. This is the polar alignment scope, and it will match up to this little fitting right here. You see there's two screws there, and you undo the two screws that are on the they're on the same space as the hour angle adjustment, and so you take those off and you mount the dovetail there, and then you have your polar finder scope. So I'm installing the finder scope. One thing that I will give Celestron some credit for is there's a little metal plate that covers the spot where the dovetail bracket goes, and it's not cheap. It's a nice little, feels like aluminum or steel little plate to cover that spot. And when you put on the dovetail, there's kind of only one way that you can put the dovetail on. And one thing that's neat about it is the dovetail width here is narrower than at the back, and so as a result, when you put the finder bracket on, it will only drop down as far as the bracket goes, and it won't slide off the back. So you can only feed it in from the front and it won't slide off the back, which is kind of a neat touch. Another thing to consider is, or when you're putting it on, is the optic that points towards the pole star is the smaller end, and the part you look through is the bigger end. That kind of threw me the first time when I took the lens caps off. It seems kind of a duh kind of a thing, but you know, normally on a telescope the eyepiece is smaller than the objective, but in this case the objective is the smaller end and the eyepiece is the larger end. Up here there are three big hand adjustment knobs, and right here is what I'm talking about, this guy right there. So those big three knurly knobs are for aligning your right ascension axis and your crosshairs. And so the first step that you need to do is first take off your counterweight to make it easier to move your right ascension axis, and then install the arm. And then what you're going to do is roughly line up the finder with Polaris so that you put Polaris in the crosshairs. This is not polar alignment. This is to align your right ascension axis. So you put Polaris in the crosshairs, and then you loosen your right ascension, and you rotate your right ascension, and you try to get the crosshairs to stay put on the star. If the crosshairs shift to the right or the left as you're doing it, that's when you use these three little knurly knobs, and you go to one side and shift the crosshairs halfway to the star, then roll to the other side and shift the crosshairs another halfway to it until you get the crosshairs to stay on Polaris as you're rotating it. That will mean that the crosshairs of the finder scope are aligned with the axis, the true axis of your right ascension. And then whenever you do your polar alignment, you're actually aligning it where you have those things parallel. That is a substitute for having it inserted into the center. Although even when you insert it into the center, you still had to make sure that you're in good alignment. So it's really important to follow that procedure, because if you just do it raw and you polar align it raw without doing that procedure, then you're going to align your little dot on the inside of the finder you're going to align that on Polaris, but it won't be truly aligned with your right ascension axis. So first you have to do that little calibration. It's always one thing or the other, isn't it? I now have to demonstrate something that I find to be comical with the polar alignment scope. So I have installed this arm as it's said to do in the instructions and in the manual. I have then put on the counterweights. I polar align my scope. I put the optical tube assembly on. And behold, if I loosen the declination knob, the declination motor housing collides with the arm. What the crap, man? I can only go, what is that, 60 degrees? And I'm hitting it. I thought the idea was I could just leave the arm on there while I operated the scope, but I guess, first off, I guess it stands up too high to be, I guess it would be hitting it with the optical tube. And then second off, what the crap? If I have to take it off each time, how am I going to make sure that it aligns with the RA axis every time? I don't understand. I guess you're supposed to do the alignment, polar alignment, and then take it off. I guess. And then store it away somewhere. If you can't leave it on there, what good is it? Maybe I'm misunderstanding the whole point. I mean, I could see where you could loosen the knob and lower it to be out of the way so that your optical tube doesn't hit it. But the fact that the first part of the arm is what collides with the motor housing. Look, it's the lower part of the arm that collides with it. And I installed it the way it said to in the instructions. I mean, I would think that you could loosen that knob right there and then stow the arm in the down position, your optical tube wouldn't hit it. But the motor housing will. What am I missing?